You don't belong here. You never did. Kang Hwayun's voice cut through the candlelit dining room like a blade through silk. Every head at the table turned. Every pair of eyes landed on the same woman, Imani Brooks Kang, sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her untouched dinner growing cold in front of her. Hwayun wasn't finished. My son was deceived. This family was violated. And you sit at my table wearing his name like you earned it. Imani said nothing. She had learned that silence was sometimes the only armor left. But then Hwayun said the one thing that broke it. You sold us out. You handed my family to the police, and my youngest son almost died because of you. The room went absolutely still. Imani reached down, removed her wedding ring, and placed it beside her plate without a word. If you have ever been accused of something you didn't do, by the very people who were supposed to love you, stay with me. Because what happens next in this story will shake you to your core. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. We release stories like this every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The dinner had been Hwayun's idea. That was the first thing Imani remembered when she thought about that night later. Not the accusations, not the silence, not the sound of crystal glasses catching the candlelight while her life was being dismantled in front of 14 people who barely knew her name. What she remembered first was that Hwayun had called it a celebration, the Kang family anniversary dinner. 31 years since Kang Do-hyun had built the first legitimate front for what would quietly become one of Seoul's most feared private empires. 31 years of careful silence, careful money, and careful marriages. Imani had not been a careful marriage. She had known that from the beginning. She had met Seo-jun in New York during what he told her was a business trip, which was technically true if you counted 3 private meetings with Port Authority contacts as business. She hadn't known what he was when she first saw him across a hotel bar, nursing a glass of water and looking at his phone like it had personally offended him. She had known he was Korean, wealthy in the way that doesn't announce itself, and deeply, quietly exhausted by something he would not name. She had been in New York finishing her architecture contract, 6 months from going home to Atlanta, not looking for anything permanent. She was 30 years old and had spent most of her 20s learning to be precise. About buildings, about men, about expectations. She did not fall for Seo-jun Kang quickly, but she fell completely. 6 months in New York became a year in Seoul. A year became a question asked over a quiet dinner in Itaewon. A small velvet box placed beside her glass of water. No performance, no crowd, just the two of them and the low sound of the restaurant around them. She had said yes before she fully understood what yes meant. She understood it now. The Kang estate sat in the northern hills of Seoul, behind walls that looked like old money and functioned like a fortress. Imani had moved into it 2 years ago, carrying 43 years of her grandmother's stories about what it meant to walk into rooms where you were not expected to stay. She carried those stories the way some women carry rosaries, not always in her hands, but always somewhere on her body. The family had been polite at first, the kind of polite that is worse than hostility because at least hostility is honest. Hwayun, Seo-jun's mother, had looked at Imani the way a woman looks at a piece of furniture placed in the wrong room. Not ugly exactly, just wrong. His aunt, his uncles, the various cousins who cycled through the estate with the comfortable authority of people who have never once questioned whether they belong somewhere, they were all polite. And then the raid happened, 18 months ago. A Tuesday night in November, cold enough that Imani had been wearing Seo-jun's cardigan over her own clothes when the sirens started. She had been working late in the East Wing study, reviewing renovation specs for a property Seo-jun was acquiring legitimately, one of his above-board investments in a district going through reconstruction. She had been the one who first saw the blue lights reflecting off the garden walls. She had not known then what the raid would cost. She had not known that inside the West Wing, men were scrambling to destroy evidence, that financial records were being fed through shredders, that Seo-jun's younger brother Min-jae had been caught in a hallway with materials he could not easily explain. She had not known any of that until afterward, when the estate was quiet again and Seo-jun sat across from her at the kitchen table and explained the damage in the flat, careful voice he used when he was trying not to show her how bad it was. It was bad. The raid had cost the organization millions in seized assets and disrupted operations. Minji had walked out by the skin of his teeth, and the cost of 3 lawyers billing $600 an hour. 3 lower-ranking members were in custody. And someone inside the family circle, had given the police enough to find the right doors on the right night. Seojun had told her he didn't believe it was her. He had looked at her across that kitchen table and said, "I don't believe you did this." And she had believed him. That was her mistake. Not loving him, not staying, not trying to fit herself into a life that had not been built with any space for her. Her mistake was believing that his private certainty would be enough. That a man who loved her in the dark would defend her in the light. For 18 months, nobody in the Kong family said the accusation out loud to her face. They didn't need to. It lived in the way Hwayeon's housekeeper stopped making eye contact, in the way Seojun's aunt excused herself whenever Imani entered a shared room, in the way certain conversations stopped when she walked into them and resumed, quieter, pointed, after she left. It lived in the tightening around Minjae's eyes whenever he looked at her, the combination of guilt and resentment that Imani had spent months trying to decode. The messages had circulated through the family 6 weeks after the raid. Imani had never seen them directly. Seojun had intercepted them before they reached her, which he had perhaps thought was protecting her. What she eventually pieced together from overheard conversations and a careful friendship with Seojun's personal assistant was that someone had produced a thread of communications apparently sent from Imani's phone to an unknown contact discussing meeting times and access points. The messages were fabricated. She knew this with the certainty of someone who had spent the relevant evening eating leftover rice and arguing with a renovation contractor over the phone. She knew her own night. She knew her own phone. But knowledge is not the same as proof, and proof is not the same as belief. And belief, in a family that had never fully chosen to see her, was always going to be the hardest thing to obtain. What she hadn't known, for most of those 18 months, was who had made them. She found out by accident. The way most terrible truths surface, not through confrontation or investigation, but through someone's carelessness. A door left open. A conversation meant to happen in private, in a corridor. She was not supposed to be walking through at that hour. Kang Ye-jin, Seojun's first cousin, 38 years old, educated in London, the Kong family's chief financial mind, trusted completely with the organization's legitimate investment portfolio. Elegant in a way that seemed effortless and was not. Imani had always found Ye-jin slightly difficult to read, warm on the surface, precise underneath. The kind of woman who remembers everything you tell her and deploys it at exactly the right moment. She had heard Ye-jin's voice through that open door, talking to someone on the phone in the low, controlled tone of a person who is confident she is alone. She had heard enough. Not every word, but enough to understand the shape of what had happened. She had stayed in that corridor for a long time afterward. Then she had gone back to her and Seojun's room and sat on the edge of the bed and very carefully thought through what it meant and what she could do about it and what it would cost to do anything at all. Ye-jin had called her 2 days later, not to confess, not to apologize, to threaten. She had been almost casual about it, the way people are casual when they're certain of their position. She told Imani that she had documentation connecting Minjae to an unauthorized side operation, something that would expose him to serious criminal liability, something that could not be managed by expensive lawyers and family connections. She told Imani that if Imani moved against her, the documentation would surface. She told Imani to think carefully about what Seojun would lose. "You love him," Ye-jin had said on that phone call, with an almost clinical curiosity. "That's actually the most useful thing about you." Imani had said nothing. She had thought about Seojun, about Minjae, who was difficult and sometimes cruel, and had never once been genuinely kind to her, but who was 26 years old and reckless in the specific frightened way of young men who haven't yet learned the cost of recklessness. She had thought about what losing his brother would do to Seojun. Not just the political damage to the organization, but the specific grief of a man who had spent his adult life trying to keep his family intact. She had stayed silent. She had been staying silent for 8 months. The anniversary dinner invitation had come from Hwayeon personally, which was unusual enough that Imani had spent 3 days trying to decide what it meant. She had asked Seojun, who had told her it was simply tradition, that the family gathered every year, that her presence was expected and appropriate. He had said all the right things. He had not said them with enough conviction to make her believe them. She had dressed carefully that evening. Dark green, fitted, nothing that could be read as either trying too hard or not trying enough. The narrow channels she navigated every time she appeared in front of Seo-jun's family. She had stood in front of their bathroom mirror for longer than she wanted to admit, looking at her own face, trying to remember what it felt like to walk into a room without calculating the odds. She had been doing this for 2 years. She was tired. The dinner was already assembled when she came down. 14 people around a table that could seat 20, the candlelight warm and deceptive, the kind of setting that looks like family and functions like an audience. Seo-jun's chair was empty. He had been delayed, some issue with a contact in the financial district that couldn't wait. He had texted her, "I'll be there by 8, save me something." It was 6:45. Hwayeon sat at the head of the table, and if she had noticed Imani come in, she gave no sign of it. Minjae was there, between two cousins Imani barely knew, looking at his phone with studied indifference. Yejin was there, sitting 3 seats from the head of the table, wearing black with a jade pin at her collar, the picture of composed elegance. When Imani took her seat, Yejin caught her eye once and looked away without any particular expression. That blankness, Imani had learned, was its own kind of message. The first hour was ordinary in the way that dangerous evenings often are. Surface conversation, careful navigation, nobody saying the thing that everyone was thinking. Food came and went, wine was poured. Stories were told by the uncles, laughed at by the aunts, endured by the younger cousins. Imani ate small amounts of everything and spoke only when directly addressed and watched the room the way she had been watching rooms for 2 years. She noticed when Hwayeon's attention began to shift. It happened gradually. The way a weather system moves in, you don't notice the temperature drop until the drop is already significant. Hwayeon had been speaking to the relative on her right, but her gaze kept returning to Imani, each time staying a little longer, each time with a little less effort at concealment. Imani recognized the look. She had catalogued its variations over 2 years, the sharp assessment of a woman who had decided something and was building toward saying it. The table talk began to thin. The older relatives started excusing themselves for after-dinner drinks in the sitting room. Within 40 minutes, what remained at the table was a smaller and more deliberate gathering. Hwayeon, Yejin, Minjae, 2 of Seo-jun's aunts, and 3 cousins who had the particular alertness of people who understood they were about to witness something. And Imani. Hwayeon set down her wine glass with a small, precise sound. "I have been patient," she said. Not directed at anyone in particular. That was the first move, establishing the speech as a general observation rather than an attack, so that it couldn't be deflected as personal. "I have been patient," she said again, "because my son asked me to be. And I respect my son." Yejin reached forward and adjusted her water glass slightly. A small, composed gesture. The gesture of a woman who already knows what comes next because she helped write it. But patience has a limit. Hwayeon's gaze moved to Imani, settled there. "And I think we have reached it." Imani said nothing. Her hands were in her lap, and she was aware of them, aware of the specific tension of keeping them still. "This family has given you 2 years," Hwayeon said. 2 years of my son's name, his home, his protection, his loyalty. And in exchange, you betrayed us." The word landed with the particular weight of something that had been waiting to be said for a long time. "I didn't betray anyone," Imani said. Her voice was level. She had practiced being level for 2 years. "The messages were not mine. There were 14 people in this organization who had access to the relevant. Then investigate the other 13. Hwayeon's expression tightened. She was not accustomed to being interrupted. That was something Imani knew and had done anyway, because there are moments when quiet dignity stops being dignity and starts being surrender. "My youngest son," Hwayeon said, and her voice shifted, still controlled, but underneath it now, something that was either fury or grief, and Imani genuinely could not tell which, was nearly arrested in his own home, because of information that came from inside these walls, and every piece of evidence was fabricated. The table went very quiet. Yejin looked up from her water glass. Just a glance, just a flicker. "I don't know what that means," Hwayeon said. Imani looked at her. looked at the woman who had never once asked her a direct question, never once asked her to her face, "Did you do this?" Who had simply received the accusation, incorporated it, and spent 18 months treating Imani with the particular cruelty of someone who believes they are being generous by not saying it out loud. She looked at Yejin, and Yejin looked back with absolute stillness. The stillness of someone who has calculated their position and found it secure, who has made their threats and believes they will hold. Something in Imani settled. Not courage exactly, something more like the exhaustion that arrives after you have been afraid for so long that fear stops being a useful warning and becomes just noise. She placed her hand flat on the table. "The night of the raid," she said, "I was in the East Wing study, alone, working on the Hongdae renovation files." She paused. "I was there because 2 hours before the raid, your niece came to me and asked me a favor." Hwayeon didn't move. "She told me she had been using Seo Jun's private office for private meetings. Meetings the family wouldn't approve of. She asked me, if anyone asked, to say that I had been the one using the office that evening." The two aunts exchanged a look. "She said it would be fine. She said no one would think twice about me being in the wrong part of the house. She said she would explain later." Imani stopped. "I said I would cover for her, because I thought it was a small thing, because she had been one of the first people in this family who was ever genuinely warm to me, and because I didn't understand at the time what she was actually setting up." Yejin's expression did not change. That itself was a tell. A person hearing a false accusation looks shocked. A person hearing the truth turns to stone. "This is," Hwayeon started. "I'm not finished," Imani said. She had never once, in 2 years, said "I'm not finished" to Hwayeon. The room felt it. She copied my phone credentials during that visit to Seo Jun's office. She had access to his security system. She's his financial director. She had legitimate access to most of the estate's infrastructure. She used both to create the message thread you were all shown. The one that looked like it came from my phone. The one that supposedly proved I had fed information to someone outside. She looked at Yejin directly. "You built it, and you gave it to people you knew would want to believe it." Yejin said quietly, "This is a very creative story." "It's not a story. You have no proof." "I have enough." That last sentence was not entirely true, but it was not entirely false either, and it landed in the room with enough weight that Yejin's composure shifted, just slightly, just for a moment, before snapping back into place. And that was when Min-jae stood up. He stood slowly, like someone who hadn't planned to stand and was surprised to find himself doing it. His chair scraped back from the table. He was looking at Yejin with an expression that Imani had never seen on his face before. Not the complicated resentment he usually turned toward her, but something open and almost frightened. "She told me," he said, "about the documentation, the evidence against me." His voice was not steady. "She told me if I ever contradicted anything she said about that night, it would surface." Hwayeon turned to look at her youngest son. "Min-jae, there is no documentation," he said. "There never was." He didn't look at his mother. He looked at Imani. "She said it to you too, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. Imani looked at him, 26 years old, and finally understanding something about the shape of the trap they had both been standing in. "Yes," she said. She did. And from somewhere beyond the half-open dining room doors, in a hallway where no one had noticed footsteps stopped nearly 20 minutes earlier, there was a silence that was different from the silence in the room. Heavier, older, the silence of a man standing completely still, while the world he thought he understood rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Seo Jun had not gone to the financial district. He had come home early. He had been standing in that hallway long enough to hear everything. And now, through the gap in the door, his reflection appeared in the dark glass of the window across the room. And Yejin saw it. Her face changed. For the first time all evening, the composure cracked. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but Imani was watching, and she saw it. The precise fractional moment when Yejin understood the lie was over. She pushed back from the table. Yejin moved the way people move when they have already rehearsed the exit. Not running, not stumbling, but rising from her chair with a deliberate, controlled motion that was almost graceful, the jade pin at her collar catching the candlelight one last time as she turned toward the far side of the room. Nobody stopped her immediately. That was the thing that Imani would think about later. The 3 or 4 seconds in which everyone at the table simply watched, as if the scene required a moment to register before the body could respond to it. Hwayeon's hand was flat on the tablecloth. Minji was still standing, still processing the words he had just said out loud, the confession that had come out of him like something that had been stuck sideways for a long time. The two aunts were looking at each other with the specific alarm of people who understand that something is happening but cannot yet determine what role they are supposed to play in it. Yejin reached the side door at the far end of the dining room, the one that opened onto the servants' corridor, and pulled it open and stepped through. Then Seojin walked in through the main doors. He did not rush. He did not announce himself. He came through the double doors from the main hallway with the unhurried, deliberate pace of a man who had already decided what the next 10 minutes were going to look like, and the room reacted to his presence the way rooms always did when Seojun Kang entered them. A collective, involuntary adjustment, like a compass needle swinging toward north. He was still wearing his coat. He had not stopped to take it off. His eyes moved across the room in a single sweep. The table, his mother's frozen expression, Min-jae's face, the empty chair where Yejin had been sitting, the door still swinging gently on its hinges at the far end. Then his eyes found Imani, and they stayed there for a moment that felt longer than it was. He said very quietly, to the man who had materialized in the doorway behind him, "Seal the estate." The man disappeared. Hwayeon said, "Seojun." "Not yet," he said. 2 words. That was all. But the quality of his voice, not raised, not theatrical, simply carrying the absolute authority of someone who had spent 15 years building an organization on the understanding that when he said something, it happened, stopped his mother mid-sentence in a way that Imani had never once managed in 2 years. He walked to the table. He pulled out the chair that Yejin had vacated, turned it around, and sat down with his arms resting on the back of it, facing the room like a man who intends to be there for a while. He looked at Min-jae. "Sit down," he said. Min-jae sat. "I need you to tell me," Seojun said, "exactly what she said to you, exactly, not a summary, the words she used." Min-jae was 26 years old and had, for as long as Imani had known him, carried himself with the particular defensive arrogance of a younger brother who has spent his whole life being protected without ever being told that was what was happening. Right now he looked younger than 26. He looked like someone who had just put down something very heavy and wasn't sure yet whether he felt relieved or sick. "She came to me about 6 weeks after the raid," Min-jae said. His voice was flat, the flatness of someone controlling it carefully. "She told me she had found something. During the financial review, the internal one, after the raid, she said there were transactions, things I had signed off on that she said they could look like I had been running a side operation without authorization." "Were you?" Seojun said. The question landed without accusation, just the question. Min-jae's jaw worked. "There were some deals I moved on faster than I should have, without full clearance, nothing that crossed the line into, it wasn't what she was describing, but on paper, with the right framing, it could be made to look." He stopped. "She knew that. And she told you to stay quiet about what you knew. She told me that if I ever pushed back on anything she said about the raid, about who was responsible, the documentation would go to the family council." He looked at his hands. "I had already let everyone believe it was Imani. I didn't correct it. And then she had that over me too. My silence about Imani became part of what she could use." The room was very still. Hwayeon was looking at her youngest son with an expression that Imani couldn't fully read from where she was sitting, something between devastation and the specific controlled fury of a woman who does not allow herself to fall apart in front of an audience. "How long?" Hwayeon said. Min-jae didn't answer. "How long did you know it wasn't her?" "I didn't know for certain," Min-jae said. "I suspected. I told myself it was possible, that maybe she had done it and Yejin was just, stop." Hwayeon's voice was quiet, but it cut. "Don't finish that sentence." Seojun had not looked away from his brother. His expression had not changed. That was the thing about Seojun that still, after 2 years, sometimes frightened Imani. Not the anger, but the absence of visible anger. The way he processed damage with his face closed and his eyes working. "Where is she going?" Imani said. Everyone looked at her. She had not meant it to come out sounding like a tactical question, but it did, and she let it stand. "The underground garage," she said. There's a secondary exit through the maintenance level. I was reviewing the schematics for the East Wing renovation. I know the layout. She looked at Seo-jun. She had a plan. Nobody runs like that without a plan. Seo-jun stood. He pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 9 seconds. Whatever was said on the other end of it, he listened, responded with 4 words Imani couldn't hear clearly, and ended the call. He looked at the man who had come back through the main doorway and given him a slight nod. "She's in the garage level," the man said. "Choi has eyes on her. She's looking for the service vehicle exit. It's locked." "Keep it locked," Seo-jun said. Don't approach her." Seo-jun. It was one of the aunts, his father's sister, a woman named Young-suk, who had always struck Imani as the most genuinely perceptive person in the family, though she generally chose not to use that perception in situations where it might cost her something. Tonight she was using it. "We need to understand what we are dealing with before we—" "I know what we are dealing with," Seo-jun said. "You heard one side of a conversation through a door. I heard my wife tell this table that she has been protecting a threat to this family for 8 months because someone used my brother as a weapon against her." He looked at Young-suk steadily. "I heard my brother confirm it. I heard Yejin run." He paused. "What side of that conversation are you still waiting to hear?" Young-suk said nothing. Hwayeon rose from her chair. In the 2 years that Imani had lived in this house, she had never seen Hwayeon Kong look uncertain. The woman was 63 years old and had spent 40 of those years navigating a world that required certainty as a basic survival skill. She had worn her authority the way she wore her clothes, precisely, deliberately, without self-consciousness. But right now she was standing at the head of her anniversary dinner table, and something in her posture had shifted in a way that made her look, for the first time, like a woman who was not completely sure of her footing. She looked at Imani. It was not an apology. Imani knew what apologies looked like. She had been waiting long enough for one to recognize its shape. And this was not it. Not yet. It was something that might become an apology if given enough time and pressure, the way certain stones become something else under heat. But right now it was just a look. A woman finally truly seeing something she had chosen not to see for 18 months. Imani looked back at her and did not fill the silence. Seo-jun walked toward the far door. The servants' corridor, the direction Yejin had gone. Imani said, without thinking, "I'm coming with you." He stopped, turned around. She thought he might argue. He didn't. "Stay behind me," he said. The servants' corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit. A different world from the warm mahogany and candlelight of the dining room. Exposed pipes overhead, storage shelves along one wall, the slightly cold functional smell of a space that was built for work rather than performance. Their footsteps were loud on the concrete. Seo-jun moved fast but not carelessly, checking each turn, one hand up occasionally to signal behind him without looking back. Imani followed. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that felt very clean and simple, stripped of the complicated layered anxiety she had been living in for months. This was a different kind of fear, more immediate, more honest. She found, distantly, that she almost preferred it. They came through the stairwell into the basement level. The underground garage was enormous, 3 levels, capacity for 20 vehicles, the walls lined with security panels and equipment storage. The Kong estate had been built in phases over decades, each generation adding to the structure, and the underground level showed its age in the most honest way. Older concrete, older lighting, the kind of place that revealed what a building actually was beneath what it presented. Seo-jun's man was posted at the bottom of the stairs, a compact, quiet man named Choi who had been with the organization for 12 years and communicated almost entirely in small, precise gestures. He pointed left. They moved left. Yejin was at the far end of the second level, standing beside a heavy steel door marked with a utility symbol. Her phone was in her hand. She was on a call, and she was speaking in a low, rapid voice that echoed slightly in the empty garage. She had removed her heels. They were sitting neatly against the wall beside her, which struck Imani as the most Yejin detail in the whole evening, that even in desperation she had tidied her shoes, and was standing in her stockinged feet on the cold concrete. She heard them coming. She turned. For a moment nobody moved. Yejin looked at Seo-jun. Then she looked at Imani standing behind him. And her expression, which had been, in the dining room, so controlled it barely qualified as an expression at all, finally broke into something recognizable. Not guilt, not fear exactly. Something more complex and more ugly than either of those things. The look of someone who has made a long series of careful calculations and can see, suddenly and clearly, that one foundational assumption was wrong. She had assumed Seojun would not come home early. She said into the phone quickly, "Now," and ended the call. Seojun said, "Yejin." She said, "I need you to let me leave." "That's not going to happen. You don't have the full picture. I have enough of it." "You have her version." She pointed at Imani. Not aggressively, with the precision of someone making a legal argument. "You have an account from someone who has a very clear interest in making me the villain of this story. Seojun, we have known each other for 30 years. 30 years. And you are standing here in a garage, having heard 20 minutes through a door, and you are ready to—" "Were you in his office that night?" Seojun said. She stopped. "Were you in my private office on the night of the raid?" The pause lasted exactly long enough to be an answer. "That's not the relevant question. It is the only question I'm asking right now." His voice had not risen. It would not rise. That was the thing that Imani understood about Seojun. The quieter he became, the more certain he was. And right now he was very quiet. "Were you in my office?" Yejin's jaw tightened. "Yes," she said. The word echoed. "And you asked Imani to cover for you." "I asked her to say she had been in the office. I didn't ask her to—" "You used my wife's cover story to build a fabricated evidence trail that made this family believe she had betrayed us." "I used what was available." Yejin's voice shifted. Something harder coming through, the rational architecture of a woman who has lived inside her own justifications for long enough to believe they are load-bearing. "She was available, Seojun. That is the truth. She was an outsider. She was someone this family already had questions about. There were larger things at stake, things you don't fully understand, and you needed a scapegoat. I needed time." She said it with sudden intensity. The raid was not just about information being leaked. There were things happening inside this organization that you could not see because you were too close to them. "Seojun, what I have been doing, the financial work, the restructuring, I was protecting this family." "From what?" he said. She hesitated. That hesitation was the most important thing that happened in that garage, because Yejin did not hesitate. In 30 years of knowing her, Seojun had never once seen Yejin hesitate over a prepared position. The hesitation meant the prepared position was gone. What was left was something rawer and more complicated than the story she had been ready to tell. "From you making mistakes," she said finally, "from you expanding too fast into territory that is going to draw the kind of attention we cannot afford. From Min-jae running unauthorized operations that are going to get someone killed. From this family—" Her voice broke, just slightly, and she caught it and rebuilt it. "From this family falling apart because the people running it are loyal to each other in all the wrong ways and none of the right ones." Imani said, "So you burned me to buy yourself time to fix it." Yejin looked at her. And for the first time all evening, possibly for the first time since Imani had known her, Yejin looked at her without the slight overlay of performance. Just looked at her. "You were never supposed to be here that long," Yejin said. I thought it would be a year, that he would realize it was too complicated and end it, and you would go home and it would—" "It would what?" Imani said. "It would be easier? For who?" "For everyone." She said it without malice, which was worse than malice. "I know how that sounds. I know. But I'd been watching this family carry risks I couldn't quantify for 2 years. And the one variable I could not calculate was you. You didn't understand what you were in the middle of, and that made you dangerous in ways you couldn't see. So instead of telling me," Imani said, "you made me the danger." Yejin didn't answer. "I want to understand something," Imani said. She was aware that her voice was calmer than she felt, and she let it be, because calm was the only tool she had in this garage and she was going to use it. "You are a brilliant woman. You have run the financial architecture of this organization for 8 years. You have managed relationships and risks and people for as long as I have known you. And your solution, your actual solution, to the problem of me being in this family was to let these people hate me for a year and a half. I didn't think— You thought it would be easy," Imani said. "You thought it would be easy because you knew how this family already felt about me. You didn't need to build a convincing lie from scratch. You just needed to give them permission to believe the thing they already wanted to believe." The silence in the garage was absolute. Even Seo-jun was still. Yejin said, after a long moment, "Yes." The word came out stripped of everything. No justification, no architecture, no calculated positioning. Just the single syllable of a woman who has run out of the will to keep building the structure and has finally let it fall. "Yes," she said again, quieter. "I knew it would work because of what they already thought. I knew your being black and American and outside this family made it. I knew it made the story easier to believe. I didn't create that. I used it." She looked at Seo-jun, and I told myself that was different. Seo-jun had not moved. I was looking at his cousin, the woman who had sat at the same table as him for 30 years, who had spoken at his father's funeral, who had stayed up through 3 consecutive nights with him during the organization's worst financial crisis, building the recovery strategy that saved them. And he was looking at her with the specific expression of a man who is understanding in real time that a thing he thought was one shape is actually another. "The rival organization," he said. Yejin's eyes shifted. It was tiny, a fraction. But Seo-jun had been reading people for 15 years. "What did you sell them?" he said. "Seo-jun, what did you sell them?" The steel door behind Yejin shuddered, once hard from the other side. Then again. She had made a call. She had said now. Seo-jun turned to Choi. "Get the others down here." Choi was already on his radio. Yejin said, "If you lock this down, they will push harder. They have people outside. This can still be managed," Seo-jun said. "Resolved, quietly. If you let me, Yejin." He said her name the way you say the name of someone you are saying goodbye to. Not with anger, with something that was worse than anger. The flat, final quality of a door closing. "Whatever you were trying to protect this family from, you have just become a larger problem than all of it." The steel door shuddered again, and this time the frame around it bent slightly, and somewhere above them, the lights went out. Not flickered, went out. The garage plunged into total darkness for 4 seconds before the backup system engaged, and the emergency strips along the floor came on, bathing everything in low red light that made the space feel completely different, smaller, more dangerous, every shadow repositioned. Imani felt Seo-jun's hand find her arm in the dark. He did not grab her. He simply put his hand there, a specific pressure that said, "I know where you are." She could hear Yejin moving. Seo-jun said, in the dark, before the red lights came up, "She's going for the door." And then the emergency lights engaged and Yejin was at the steel door with a keycard she had pulled from somewhere. Her dress, her sleeve, Imani didn't see where, swiping it against the reader panel with the quick, certain motions of someone who has known this exit was here for a long time, who has planned for this specific moment, who has not been improvising tonight at all. The reader beeped. The door opened, and on the other side of it, instead of an escape route, there were 3 of Seo-jun's security team in the corridor, blocking the passage with the kind of unhurried, professional stillness that is more threatening than aggression. Yejin stopped. She stood in the doorway with the red emergency light behind her and the corridor ahead blocked in the full weight of the evening. Everything she had built, and everything it had cost, and everything she had just confessed in front of the one person it mattered most to confess it in front of, landing on her all at once. Her hand, still holding the keycard, dropped to her side. Seo-jun walked toward her slowly. He stopped 3 feet away. He held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she took the keycard and placed it in his palm with the careful, exhausted motion of someone laying down the last thing they were carrying. "I need to know everything," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her composure was gone. What was left was just her face, older than usual in the red light, the jade pin at her collar slightly askew now, her stockinged feet still on the cold concrete where she had abandoned her heels 20 minutes ago in the dining room, trying to be ready for a sprint that had led her nowhere. "There's more than you know," she said. "I know that." "If I tell you everything, then I will know everything," he said. "That's the point." She looked past him at Imani. Imani had not moved from the spot where she had been standing. She was watching Yejin with the attention of someone who has spent 18 months trying to understand a puzzle and has just had every piece returned to her at once, and now needs a moment to hold it and see what the full picture actually looks like. Yejin said to her, directly, "I am sorry." Imani didn't say anything, not yet, because sorry, at this point, was a word that needed a lot of space around it before it meant anything, and Imani was not going to compress it into a quick forgiveness just to make the room feel better. She had been compressing things into quick forgiveness for 2 years. She was done with that. She gave Yejin a single nod. Acknowledgement, not absolution. Yejin looked at Seojun. Then she said, "There's a secondary server. Financial records I kept off the main system. It has everything. The parallel accounts, the transactions with the rival group, the original documentation I told Minjae existed." She paused. "And the proof that none of it ever actually existed." Seojun said, "Where?" "East Wing," she said. "The server room off the old study." The old study. Imani felt something cold move through her. The East Wing study. The room where she had been sitting the night of the raid. The room she had been working in, alone, while Yejin was in Seojun's private office doing something that needed to be hidden. The room that had always, in the renovation schematics, showed a secondary utility space behind the north wall, a space Imani had flagged in her notes as potentially usable for equipment storage, but which had never appeared on any of the official floor plans. She had seen it on the original construction documents. She had mentioned it to no one because it had seemed irrelevant. She looked at Seojun. He was already looking at her. "I know where it is," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and in that moment there was an entire conversation that did not need words. The specific, accumulated shorthand of two people who know each other well enough to communicate in the space between sentences. A shorthand that had been buried under 18 months of silence and doubt, and the careful, grinding work of pretending things were fine when they were not. "Show me," he said. Above them, somewhere in the estate, there were sounds. The controlled commotion of a security operation in progress. The distant voices of men moving through corridors with purpose. The rival organization's people had breached the outer perimeter. They were inside the grounds now. They were here for the evidence, and they were here for Yejin, and they had almost certainly expected to find neither Seojun nor his full security team on a family anniversary dinner night. They had made the same mistake Yejin had made. They had assumed that because Seojun's family had been busy destroying itself from the inside, they had not been paying attention to what was coming from the outside. He handed the keycard to Choi, gave instructions in a low, rapid voice. Choi moved. The three men in the corridor moved. The garage began to fill with the organized, quiet chaos of men who have drilled for exactly this kind of situation. Seojun turned back to Imani. "The study," he said. She nodded. She turned toward the stairwell, and she walked, and he came with her, and behind them Yejin was guided by two of Seojun's men back toward the stairs. Not roughly, not with cruelty, but with the unmistakable finality of someone who is no longer being given choices about where she goes next. The lie had lived for 18 months. It had survived because it was convenient, and because it was aimed at someone the family had already decided to see a certain way, and because the man who could have ended it had loved his wife in private and said nothing in public, and because the woman at the center of it had been willing to absorb the damage rather than let it land on someone she was trying to protect. All of that was over. What was not over? What was just beginning, in the red-lit dark of the underground garage and the corridors above it, and the estate grounds where men were moving with bad intentions toward evidence that could bring down the rival organization financing all of it, was the accounting, the full accounting, for what had been done, and by whom, and what it had cost, and what it would take to come back from it, if coming back was even a thing that was possible anymore. Imani hit the stairwell door and pushed it open and went through it into the harsh fluorescent light of the corridor above. And behind her she could hear Seojun's steady footsteps, and above her she could hear the sounds of the estate under siege, and inside her chest there was something that was not quite fear and not quite relief and not quite anger, but contained all three the way a storm contains different kinds of weather, all of it moving, all of it building, none of it resolved. The server room was behind the north wall of the East Wing study, and inside it was everything. The East Wing study smelled the same as it always had, old paper and the faint chemical trace of blueprint ink, the particular smell of a room that had been used for serious work over a long period of time. Imani had spent more hours in this room than anywhere else in the estate, bent over renovation schematics and structural surveys, making the kind of careful, detailed decisions that nobody in the Kong family ever acknowledged because they were the quiet kind of work, the kind that makes everything around it look effortless. She went straight to the north wall. It looked like storage, Shelving units built into the wall, architectural books and rolled documents, and a row of labeled binders that she had organized herself 8 months ago. But she had seen the original construction plans. She knew the shelving unit on the far left was 2 inches shallower than the others. She knew why. She put both hands on the left edge of the unit and pulled. It swung outward on concealed hinges with a sound like a slow exhale, the specific groan of something that has been held in position a long time and is finally being allowed to move. Behind it was a door, steel, flat, with a keypad and a single biometric reader. Seojun looked at the door, then at Yejin, who had been walked up the stairs by his men and was now standing in the study doorway, with her wrists held loosely by a man named Park, who had the expression of someone doing a job. "Open it," Seojun said. Yejin said, "If I open it, you need to understand what you're going to find. Open it." Seojun, listen to me for 30 seconds. What is in that room is going to change things. Not just tonight, not just for me, for the organization, for decisions you made. I need you to, Yejin. He said it simply. Open the door. She looked at him for a long moment, then she walked to the keypad. Park moved with her, one hand still on her elbow, and she pressed her thumb to the biometric reader and entered a 6-digit code without hesitating over a single number. The pad beeped green. The door disengaged with a sound like a held breath releasing. Seojun pushed it open and went in first. The room was small, maybe 12 feet by 8, the kind of space that doesn't appear on floor plans because it was never intended to appear on floor plans. The walls were bare concrete, slightly cold. A single desk along the right wall held 2 monitors, a rack-mounted server unit, and an external drive array with 6 drives slotted in. The screens were dark, but the server lights were green, which meant it was running. Had been running. For what Imani calculated, looking at the dust patterns on the hardware, was probably close to 2 years, the same length of time she had been in this house. Seojun stood in the center of the room and looked at the equipment with the careful attention of a man cataloging damage before deciding how to respond to it. He didn't touch anything yet. That was one of the things Imani had always found precise about him, the way he gave himself a moment to see a thing fully before acting on it. He turned to Yejin. "Walk me through it," he said. Yejin came into the room. Park came with her. She stood beside the desk and looked at the equipment the way a surgeon might look at a patient they had spent a long time keeping alive through increasingly difficult interventions. "The main server holds financial records," she said. 2 parallel accounts that don't appear in the organization's official books. Started about 28 months ago. "Before Imani came," Seojun said. "Yes." "What's in the accounts?" She picked up a wireless keyboard from the desk and woke one of the monitors. The screen came up and she navigated to a directory with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and typed in credentials from memory. A spreadsheet opened, dense, columnar, the kind of financial document that looks like noise until you know how to read it, at which point it looks like a map. Seojun looked at it. He knew how to read it. The color left his face. Not dramatically, just the warmth went out of it, the way warmth goes out of a room when a window is left open in winter, slowly and then all at once. "These are Young-suk's accounts," he said. His aunt, his father's sister. The woman who had been sitting at the anniversary dinner table 2 floors above them, asking careful questions about what side of the story they were still waiting to hear. Yejin said nothing. "Yejin." "Yes," she said. He stepped closer to the screen. His eyes moved across the columns. Imani watched him and did not speak because there was nothing to say. She was watching a man discover something, and the act of discovery has its own pace and cannot be rushed. "She's been running a parallel financial channel," he said. It was not a question. He was saying it out loud the way you say something out loud when you need to hear it in the air to believe it. "To who?" "The rival syndicate," Yejin said. "For how long?" 3 years. The silence that followed was different from the other silences of the evening. The earlier ones had been tight, pressurized, the silence of held breath and controlled emotion. This one was wider, emptier. The silence of a man standing in a room where the floor has just turned out to be a different material than he thought it was. 3 years, he said. "Yes. My father was still alive 3 years ago." "I know." He turned away from the screen, turned toward the wall, stood with his back to everyone for a moment, and Imani watched the line of his shoulders and the back of his neck and said nothing and did not move toward him. Because there are moments when proximity is the wrong instinct, when a person needs the space of their own body around them before they can receive anything from outside it. Then he turned back. The raid, he said. 18 months ago. Yejin met his eyes. It wasn't about information being leaked from inside this organization, he said. Not asking. Working it through out loud, the logic assembling itself in his voice as he spoke. The raid was targeted. They knew exactly which locations to hit, which doors to open, which timing would cause maximum disruption. He stopped. They had a source inside the organization who had been feeding them structural information for 3 years. And you... He stopped again. I found out 8 months before the raid, Yejin said. I found the accounts. I confronted her. She said her without any particular inflection, but they all knew who her was. She told me that if I said anything, she would dismantle me. She had documentation on the parallel accounts I had been using for the organization's legitimate tax restructuring, things that were legal but would not look legal to people who didn't understand the architecture. So instead of coming to me, Seojun said, you built a cage around the situation. I tried to manage it. By framing my wife. By buying time. Yejin's voice cracked, just at the edge, and she rebuilt it. I was trying to find a way to expose Young-suk without bringing down everything around her. She had been in this organization since the beginning. Her name is on half the foundational agreements. If she goes down wrong, she takes 1/3 of our legitimate holdings with her, minimum. You needed a year and a half? Imani said. Yejin looked at her. You needed a year and a half, Imani said again. Her voice was not raised. It was very quiet, actually, quieter than it had been all evening. And while you were taking that year and a half, I was living in this house being treated like I had handed this family to its enemies, while you knew who had actually done it. I know, Yejin said. Do you? Yes. Because I want to make sure, Imani said, that you understand the specific thing that happened. Not the big picture, not the financial architecture, the specific thing. She paused. His mother told me I brought disgrace into this family. She said that in front of 14 people who will remember it for the rest of their lives. His brother looked at me for 18 months like I had tried to get him killed. Every person in this house treated me like a liability they were being forced to carry. She stopped. And every single day of that, you knew. Yejin said, yes. It came out small. And you let it continue, Imani said, because exposing Young-suk was complicated. The word complicated landed in the room like something thrown. Seojun said very quietly, that's enough. It was not directed at Imani. It was directed at the situation. A man calling a halt to the specific kind of scene where truth is being said correctly but will start doing damage in the wrong direction if it continues another 30 seconds. Imani recognized it and stopped. She stepped back. He looked at Yejin. Everything you have on her, all of it, the accounts, the correspondence, the documentation of how the raid information was passed. I want it transferred to my team's system in the next 20 minutes. If I do that, you don't have alternatives right now, Yejin. I need you to understand that. She looked at the server. Then she sat down at the desk and began to work. Seojun pulled out his phone. He made a call that lasted 40 seconds, keeping his voice so low that Imani could hear the tone, but not the words. When he ended it, he looked at Park. Bring Young-suk down here. Park's face did not change. This was why Seojun kept men like Park. They had the professional discipline to receive genuinely surprising orders without performing surprise. Park left. Imani and Seojun were alone in the server room for the first time all evening. Yejin was at the desk 3 feet away, but she was inside the work now, focused, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the concentration of a woman who has decided that full cooperation is the only position she has left. Seojun looked at Imani. She looked back at him. There were things to say. A quantity of things that had accumulated over 18 months of careful, managed silence. Not the dramatic things, not the accusations and the defenses, but the ordinary ones. The ones that pile up in a marriage when both people are managing their damage privately and meeting each other on the surface and calling it fine. Those things were all still there. They would need to be said. But not here. Not now. not in a concrete room 8 feet underground, while the estate above them was under active incursion, and his childhood aunt had turned out to be the origin of everything. She said, "Are you all right?" He looked at her like the question surprised him. Then, "No." "Okay," she said. That was it. That was the whole exchange. But it was the first honest exchange they had had in a long time, and they both knew it, and it sat between them like something warm in the cold room. Above them, they could hear movement, controlled, purposeful. His security teams working. The rival organization's incursion was being contained. She could tell from the sounds, not chaos, but structure. Trained men doing a job they had trained for. Then the sounds changed. It happened fast. One moment, the overhead noise had the rhythm of a controlled operation, footsteps, voices, the specific percussion of doors and corridors being managed. And then something shifted, a different quality of sound, heavier and less controlled. And then there was a crack that was unmistakably not a door. Seojun had his phone out before the echo died. He got through to someone immediately, listened for 7 seconds. His face did not change, but his hand tightened around the phone. "Stay here," he said to Imani. "Seojun, I mean it. Stay in this room." He looked at Yejin. "Keep working. Do not stop." To the single security man remaining at the door, nobody in or out. Then he went. Imani stood in the server room and listened to his footsteps go up the corridor and away, and felt the specific, particular helplessness of someone who has been told to stay behind and knows the logic of it and hates it anyway. Yejin said, without looking up from the screen, "He knows what he's doing." "I know that," Imani said. "I wasn't sure if you did, after everything." "I always knew he was competent," Imani said. "That was never the question." Yejin was quiet. Her fingers kept moving. Then she said, "The question was whether he loved you enough to act on it." Imani said nothing. "I watched him," Yejin said. "For 2 years I watched him love you in this very careful, very private way. And I watched this family work on him, and I watched him not break exactly. Bend." She stopped typing for a moment, just a moment. "I told myself that was proof that you were wrong for him, that the bending was evidence the relationship was wrong. But I think what it actually proved was that I was watching a man who had never once in his life had to fight for something personal, only professional, and he didn't know how." Imani looked at her. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Yejin said. "It's just true." She went back to typing. Imani looked at the door, listened. The sounds from above had changed again. Less movement, more voices. She could not make out the words. She tried to read the quality of the voices the way you read weather. Not the content, just the temperature. She could not read it. Then Park came back. He came through the door alone, and the first thing Imani registered was that he was alone. That he had gone to get Young-suk and had returned without her. The second thing she registered was his expression, which had departed from its professional neutrality for the first time that evening. "She's not in the estate," he said. Yejin's hand stopped on the keyboard. "What do you mean she's not in the estate?" Imani said. "She left the dinner approximately—" Park checked his watch. 45 minutes ago. Before the garage, before the power cut. She told the dining room staff she was going to lie down. She didn't go to her room." He paused. "We have her on exterior cameras at the north service gate at 22:17. Imani did the math. 22:17 was 4 minutes after Yejin had run from the dining room. 3 minutes after Seojun had come in through the main doors. Young-suk had left before any of it happened. Or not before it happened. Because of it. "She knew," Imani said. Park said, "We believe she had a signal. Something that told her the situation in the dining room had changed." Imani looked at the monitors on the desk. At the server equipment. At the room that Yejin had built and maintained and kept off every official record for 2 years. "She had access to this room," Imani said. It was not a question, but she looked at Yejin for confirmation. Yejin's face had gone very still in a new way. Not the controlled stillness of earlier in the evening, but a different kind. The stillness of someone recalculating. "I never gave her access," Yejin said slowly. "But she had it," Imani said. I don't know how. The biometric is keyed to me only. The code is—" She stopped. Her eyes moved to the keypad, and Imani watched her think something through and arrive somewhere she hadn't expected to arrive.
She must have had a passive reader, something that captured my code input. The biometric can't be cloned, but the keypad. She was monitoring your server, Imani said. Yejin looked at the equipment with the expression of someone who has just understood that the cage they built to contain a dangerous thing was also being used by the dangerous thing as a watchtower.
She knew everything I had on her, Yejin said. She knew the exact moment I started the data transfer. She looked at Imani. She didn't run because of what happened in the dining room. She ran because the moment I opened this room and started copying files. She got an alert, Imani said. Yes. So she's been watching you, Imani said, the same way you've been watching her. The irony of it was too large to be funny. It just sat there, enormous and ugly. Park said, Mr. Kang needs to know. Go, Imani said. Park went. Imani stood in the middle of the server room and looked at Yejin sitting at the desk and thought about the specific recursive nightmare of what she was looking at. Two women in the same family who had discovered the same betrayal and both decided to manage it privately, both building parallel structures of documentation and leverage and carefully maintained silence, neither one knowing the other was doing the same thing, and in the middle of it all, as the target and the instrument and the collateral damage of all of it, herself. She sat down on the edge of the desk. She's not going to the rival syndicate, she said. Yejin looked up. Think about it, Imani said. If she runs to them, she's a liability. She's burned. The moment this server data gets into Seojun's hands, she's only valuable to them for however long she has information they don't already have, which is hours, Yejin said. She's not running to them, Imani said. She's running to the evidence. Yejin went very still. If there is documentation somewhere outside this room, Imani said, something she controls independently, something that could be used as leverage against Seojun, against the organization, against you, she's going to try to reach it before we can. Yejin said, the insurance file. What? 3 years ago. Yejin was already turning back to the keyboard, pulling up a different directory. 3 years ago, when I first started suspecting there was an internal source feeding the rival group, I started building a documentary record. Not just financial, communications, meeting logs, physical access records. I stored it here. But I also... Her fingers stopped. I also created a mirrored backup, offsite. I gave the access credentials to one person outside the organization as a safeguard. Someone I trusted. Who? Imani said. Yejin looked at her. Yejin, who did you give the credentials to? A lawyer, she said. An independent attorney I have used for personal matters for 6 years. Park Soyeon. She holds the access in a sealed instruction. She's not supposed to open it unless she receives a specific contact from me. Or unless someone else contacts her first, Imani said. The sentence landed in the room and did not need an answer. Does Young-suk know about the lawyer? Imani said. Yejin's face answered before her voice did. She might, she said. If she had access to my communications through this room, then she knows exactly where the backup is, and she has a 45-minute head start, Imani said. She stood up from the desk. Her mind was moving very fast, and she let it, not trying to manage or moderate, just following the logic where it went, which was what she did when she was working on a structural problem. And this was a structural problem, just a different kind than she had trained for. I need to tell Seojun, she said. Go, Yejin said. I'll keep transferring. Don't stop me. Every minute of data I can get out of this room before something happens to the hardware is... Keep working, Imani said. She went out through the server room door and into the study, and then into the corridor beyond it, and moved fast, not running but close to it, retracing the route they had taken from the garage, up through the east wing, toward the sounds of Seojun's voice somewhere above. She found him in the main corridor of the ground floor. He was talking to 3 of his men, low and rapid, his coat still on, his phone in his hand. When he saw her face, he broke off mid-sentence. Young-suk left before the garage, she said. She was monitoring the server room. She knows Yejin started the transfer. She's going for a backup file, an independent insurance archive that Yejin built. It's accessible through an outside attorney. If she reaches the lawyer first, Seojun said, Park Soyeon. Imani stopped. He said it like someone recalling a name they have heard before. You know that name, she said. His expression was doing something she had never seen it do before. Not the controlled blankness of processing bad news, not the particular flatness of suppressed anger. Something more complicated. Something that looked like a man arriving at an understanding that reorganizes everything around it. Park Soyeon came to me 14 months ago, he said. 14 months ago, he said. She told me she had been approached by someone from inside my organization who wanted to give her confidential documents as a safeguard. She asked me if I had authorized it. He paused. I told her I hadn't. What did she do? She told me she would not accept the documents without my knowledge. She said she would inform me if the person approached her again. He looked at Imani. She never contacted me again. I assumed the matter had been dropped. It wasn't dropped, Imani said. Yejin found another way to transfer the files. Park Soyeon must have agreed eventually, or Yejin used a different contact and gave her the same name to protect. Or Park Soyeon lied to me, Seo-jun said, and she took the documents anyway. The corridor was very quiet around them. Imani thought about what that meant. About what it meant if the lawyer Yejin had trusted had also been in contact with Seo-jun. About what it meant if a person who knew about the insurance file from two different directions, Yejin on one side, Seo-jun on the other, had been sitting quietly in the middle of that knowledge for over a year. Where does she live? Imani said. Mapo district, he said. Then Young-suk is in a car right now, 45 minutes ahead of us, heading to an apartment in Mapo to reach an archive that contains the only independent documentary evidence of 3 years of financial betrayal, including the proof that the raid on your organization 18 months ago was facilitated by your father's sister. She stopped, took a breath. If she destroys it, then we have what's on the server in the East Wing and nothing else, he said. And she becomes a much harder case to make. He looked at his men. 3 seconds of decision. Imani could almost see it happening. The rapid calculation of resource, distance, risk. Then, vehicles. Now. To the man on his right, get me Park Soyeon's address confirmed. Not from memory, pull it from the file. To the man on his left, 2 cars armed. Contact the lawyers on standby. He turned to Imani. She expected him to tell her to stay. He said, You're coming. She blinked. You know what to look for in a document archive, he said. If we get there and the files are partial or corrupted or she's attempted to delete, I need someone who can tell me what's missing. He paused. Can you do that? Yes, she said. They moved. The estate's main entrance was controlled chaos. Vehicles being repositioned, men in motion, the incursion from the rival organization's team having been neutralized, but its aftermath still being processed. Seo-jun moved through all of it like a man who has spent his whole life navigating the aftermath of crises he didn't start. And Imani moved behind him and matched his pace and did not let herself think about the dinner she had not finished eating, or the wedding ring that was still sitting beside her plate 2 floors up, or the coat she had left draped over the back of her chair when she had thought 2 hours ago that she was walking out of this house for the last time. There would be time for all of that. First there was a car and a road, and 45 minutes of distance between them and the woman who had been burning this family from the inside for 3 years, who had watched everything collapse in the right direction and had calculated correctly that the moment of maximum chaos was the moment to run. Young-suk was 61 years old and had survived in this organization for 4 decades by being underestimated. Imani understood, sitting in the back of the car as it moved through the night streets of Seoul, that she and Young-suk had more in common than she would have liked. Both of them had survived in the Kang family through the same mechanism, the same fundamental error made by the people around them. People had looked at them and decided, for different reasons, that they were not the most dangerous person in the room. The car accelerated. Beside her, Seo-jun was on the phone, his voice flat and operational, coordinating the approach. And outside the window, the city moved past at speed, lit and indifferent, and Imani held the door handle and thought about the server room and the backup file, and the lawyer who had lied to Seo-jun's face about taking documents she had taken. And she thought about all the ways this evening had continued to expand outward from the single moment at the dinner table when she had finally decided to stop being quiet. And she thought, there is no version of this night that ends simply. She was right, because 40 minutes later, when they reached the Mapo apartment building and took the elevator to the 14th floor, and Seo Jun's men opened the door to Park Soyeon's apartment with a key the building manager had provided under the kind of quiet pressure that building managers in Seoul tend not to refuse. They found the apartment empty, the laptop on the desk open and wiped, and on the kitchen counter, a single phone with its screen cracked and its SIM card removed. Park Soyeon was gone, and she had not been alone when she left, because in the hallway outside the apartment, Seo Jun's man crouched down and looked at the floor and looked up at Seo Jun and said, "Two sets of footprints, one set of heels, one set of flat shoes. Two women, Young-suk and the lawyer, together." Seo Jun stood in the empty apartment and looked at the wiped laptop and said nothing for a very long time. Then he looked at Imani, and she looked at him. And in the clean, cold emptiness of the apartment, with the cracked phone on the counter and the ghost of two women's departure still in the air, they were both understanding the same thing at the same moment, that the betrayal they had come here to document had roots that went deeper and older and further than either of them had known when they walked out of the estate an hour ago, and that whatever they had thought they were containing tonight had not been contained at all. It had simply moved, the way water moves when you block one channel, finding the next available path with the patient, indifferent logic of things that have been moving for a very long time. Seo Jun turned to his man. "Find them," he said. The apartment smelled like coffee that had been left on too long, and the specific synthetic sharpness of a laptop that had been running hard before someone wiped it and walked away. Seo Jun stood in the center of it with his hands at his sides and his phone in his right hand and said nothing for 11 seconds. Imani counted them without meaning to. Then he made 3 calls in rapid succession, each one shorter than the last. After the third, he put the phone in his coat pocket and looked at his lead man, a broad-shouldered veteran named Wu, who had been with the organization since before Seo Jun inherited it and communicated primarily in half-sentences and precise eye contact. "Cameras," Seo Jun said. "Building footage is being pulled," Wu said. "Lobby has a blind spot. Old system. Analog. The parking structure camera was disabled at 2241. Professionally disabled. Not a malfunction. They knew we'd come here. Yes. Vehicle. Working on it." Seo Jun turned to the window. The Mapo district spread out 14 floors below, the Han River visible in the middle distance, the city indifferent and enormous around the specific small disaster of this apartment. Imani looked at the cracked phone on the counter and the open laptop and the 2 coffee cups in the sink, 2 cups, both used, which meant they had sat here together, Young-suk and the lawyer, and waited and talked, and then left in a controlled way, not in panic. "They had a plan," Imani said. Seo Jun looked at her. "2 cups," she said. "They sat here. They had time." She looked at the laptop. She didn't wipe it in a hurry. A proper wipe takes time to run. They knew they had a window before we'd get here, and they used it. She paused. "This wasn't improvised. This was prepared. Young-suk has been preparing exits for 3 years," Seo Jun said. "This was probably the 3rd or 4th contingency." "Then where does the 4th contingency go?" He didn't answer immediately. He was looking at something across the room, a small shelf near the door with keys on hooks, one hook empty, a recycling bin beneath it with a single piece of paper. He crossed to it and picked up the paper. It was a parking validation receipt from a structure 2 blocks east, stamped that afternoon at 1432. He handed it to Wu without a word. Wu was on his radio before he reached the door. Imani picked up one of the coffee cups from the sink and held it, still faintly warm on the outside. Maybe an hour ago, maybe less. She set it down. "The backup file," she said. "If they ran with it—" "They didn't carry it out physically," Seo Jun said. "It's a digital archive. It's somewhere on a server they control access to." He looked at the wiped laptop. "She didn't wipe it to destroy the file. She wiped it to destroy the access pathway, make it harder to trace where the file actually lives. Can Yejin find it? If the architecture is something she built, maybe. If Young-suk modified it—" He stopped. Maybe not quickly enough. His phone rang. He answered, listened for 4 seconds, said, "Send it to Wu," and ended the call. Looked at Wu. Wu was already reading something on his own phone. He looked up. "Silver SUV, registered to a shell company. We're running it. Exited the parking structure at 2304, heading south on Mapodero." South. Imani thought about south, About what was south of Mapo at this hour, what destinations made sense, what a 61-year-old woman with 40 years of organizational knowledge and a lawyer who had lied to Seo Jun's face would want to reach at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She said, "The river." Seo Jun looked at her. "There are 3 private marina facilities south of here on the Han," she said. "I know because I reviewed the acquisition specs for the Uedo waterfront development last year. Seo Jun, you had me cross-reference all private water access points in the district for the zoning application." She held his gaze. "If they have a boat, they don't need a road. They don't need a border crossing that can be watched. They need 15 minutes on the water." He was already moving. The 2 cars left the Mapo building at speed that was controlled enough not to draw police attention and fast enough to mean something. Seojun was in the first car with Wu and 2 others. Imani was in the second with Park, and a man she didn't know the name of who drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set and his eyes doing the work of someone navigating at the limit of what's reasonable on city streets at night. She looked out the window at Seoul moving past and tried to breathe normally and found it required more deliberate effort than it should have. Her phone buzzed. It was Yejin texting from the server room. "Transfer at 67%. Found something. There's a 3rd account, older than the other 2. Goes back 5 years. Different structure. I don't think this was just Young-suk." Imani stared at the screen. Typed back, "What do you mean different structure?" 3 seconds. Then, "The authorization signatures. They're not hers alone. There's a secondary signatory on the account establishment. Someone inside the core organizational structure who would have had the authority to create a parallel financial channel at that level without triggering internal audit flags." Imani's chest felt tight. "Send me the signatory name." The dots appeared, stopped, appeared again. Then, "I need you to understand that I'm looking at this right now and I'm not certain I'm reading it correctly. The document is partially encrypted. I can see the signature field but not the complete name. I can see the first character. What is it?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. K for Kang. Imani put the phone against her knee and looked out the window at the river coming into view ahead, the black water of the Han catching the city light and breaking it into pieces, and she thought about what the letter K meant in a family where almost everyone's last name began with it. And she thought about who specifically would have had the organizational authority 5 years ago to establish a parallel financial channel without triggering an audit, and she thought about what Yejin had said in the garage. "I was watching this family carry risks I couldn't quantify for 2 years, not 18 months. 2 years. She had been watching for 2 years, but the account was 5 years old. She needed to tell Seojun. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Yejin found a 3rd account," she said. 5 years old, joint authorization. The secondary signature starts with K." The silence on the other end of the call lasted 4 seconds. "She can't read the full name," Imani said. "The document is partially encrypted. But Seojun, 5 years ago, who would have had the authority to establish something like that without triggering the internal audit system?" He said, "My father." The word landed between them on a phone call moving south through Seoul at speed, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Or someone my father trusted enough to give that level of access," Seojun said. "Which was who?" "At that time." A pause. "Young-suk, his legal counsel, his personal financial advisor." Another pause. "And me." "You were 29, Imani said. "I was already running operations. Did you establish any parallel accounts in that period?" "No." Flat, certain, no deliberation. "No." "Then it was once of the others. Or my father himself." The possibility sat in the air between them on the call, enormous and careful, the specific gravity of a suspicion about a dead man. Someone who cannot defend himself, someone whose name means something to the people left behind, someone whose guilt or innocence will reorganize the meaning of everything that followed him. "We focus on Young-suk first," Seojun said. "We find her. We get the archive. Then we read the full document and we know what we're dealing with." A beat. "Don't tell anyone else about the 3rd account until I've seen it myself. Not even Wu." "Understood," she said. She ended the call and held the phone in her lap and looked at the river. The first marina was empty. A weekend operation, locked down for the night, no vehicles in the lot. The second was a larger facility with a staffed gate, and Wu talked to the gate attendant for 90 seconds and came back shaking his head. No silver SUV, no recent departures logged. The third marina was smaller, the access road unpaved, the kind of place that has been around long enough to have developed an institutional habit of not asking questions. The gate was open and unattended. There was a silver SUV parked at an angle in the gravel lot, driver's door still open, the interior light on. They had been here within the last 10 minutes. Seojun's men deployed from the cars fast and quiet, 4 of them fanning out across the facility, moving in the specific disciplined way of people who have done this many times and do not need to talk about it. Seojun went forward directly. Imani went with him because he didn't tell her not to, and she was done waiting in rooms. The marina had 8 dock slips. 6 were occupied by covered boats in winter storage configuration. 1 was empty, freshwater disturbance in the slip, the lines that should have been holding a boat still swinging slightly. 1 slip was occupied by a boat with its engine running. The boat was a 30-foot cabin cruiser, older, well-maintained. Its running lights were on. On its deck, 2 figures were moving, 1 casting off the last stern line, 1 at the helm inside the cabin, visible through the glass. Seojun was at the dock's edge in 3 strides. Young-suk. His voice carried across the water with the specific force of a word spoken by someone who has been building toward this moment for an entire night, and has arrived at it without any remaining patience for performance. The figure casting off the line stopped. Young-suk. She was 61 years old, and she was wearing the same clothes she had worn at the anniversary dinner. A charcoal cardigan, dark slacks, her silver hair pulled back the way it always was. And she was standing on the deck of a boat in a marina in Mapo at 11:15 at night, and she looked at her nephew across 12 feet of black water with an expression that was not guilt and was not fear, and was something that Imani, standing slightly behind Seojun, found harder to read than either of those things. It looked like exhaustion, the deep, old kind, the kind that has been there for years. "Get off the boat," Seojun said. The figure at the helm inside the cabin appeared in the doorway. Park Soyeon, 40-something, sharp-featured, the composed look of a woman who has built her professional identity on the management of difficult situations. She was holding a tablet, a device that was not the wiped laptop from the apartment, but something newer, something that was currently connected to something by the glow of its screen. Imani registered the tablet before Seojun did. "That's the archive access," she said. Seojun's eyes went to the tablet. Park Soyeon looked at Imani with the flat appraisal of someone recalibrating a threat assessment. "If I close this connection," Park Soyeon said, addressing Seojun, not Imani, "the archive auto-deletes, 40-second timer, built-in failsafe." She held the tablet in a way that made clear she was 1 motion away from making that motion. It was designed to prevent exactly this kind of extraction. "Designed by who?" Seojun said. "By me," Park Soyeon said. "On your aunt's instruction. 3 years ago. You told me you wouldn't take those documents. I told you I wouldn't accept them without your knowledge. I didn't." She held his gaze without flinching. "I built a separate system that didn't require me to accept anything. The archive lives on a server I don't control. I only control the access." Seojun looked at her for a long moment, then at Young-suk. "Step off the boat," he said again, quieter this time. The quieter he got, the more dangerous it was. And Park Soyeon was professional enough to understand that. But Young-suk had known him since he was born, and she understood it at a cellular level. Young-suk said, "Let me explain something to you." "No." "Seojun, get off the boat, come to the dock, and then you can explain everything you want. But I'm not standing here having this conversation while you are on a boat with a running engine." Young-suk looked at him. Something moved in her face. Not quite grief, not quite decision, but the territory between them. The space where a person who has committed to a path for a very long time finally looks back at what the path cost and tries to determine whether it was worth it and comes up with an answer she doesn't entirely like. She stepped off the boat onto the dock. Park Soyeon did not move from the cabin doorway. She kept the tablet. Wu moved to the boat's stern. Park Soyeon looked at him, looked at the tablet, did not close the connection, but her thumb rested on the edge of the device in a way that was a statement. Young-suk stood on the dock in front of Seojun, close to him, 3 feet, the conversational distance of family, people who have shared tables and holidays, and the particular intimacy of a shared organization for decades. She said, Your father knew. Seojun's face did not move. The third account, she said. The original channel. Do-hyun established it, not me. She said it without defiance, as a statement of fact, the kind that has been held for a long time and is being set down. 8 years ago, your father made contact with the rival group. Not to betray the organization. The way you're thinking about it right now is wrong. He made contact because he believed, correctly, that the two organizations were going to collide in a way that would destroy both of them. He was trying to build a channel, a controlled relationship, something that would allow both groups to operate without the kind of conflict that draws police attention and ends empires. Seojun said, he was feeding them our financial architecture. He was sharing strategic information in exchange for operational boundaries, Young-suk said. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. No. Not from where you're standing. She looked at him steadily. Because you have never believed that negotiation with a rival is anything other than weakness. Your father believed something different. He was trying to protect this family from a war he could see coming. He died before he could finish building the thing that would have prevented it. And you continued it, Seojun said. Yes, for 5 years. For 3, after he died. The first 2 were his. And the raid. She looked away for the first time, looked at the black water beside the dock. The raid was not supposed to happen, she said. The arrangement had parameters. There were things that were not supposed to be shared. Someone on their side exceeded the parameters without my knowledge. She came back to his face. When I found out, I tried to contain the damage. You tried to manage it, Seojun said. Like everyone else in this family has been managing everything for 5 years. Yejin was managing Young-suk. You were managing the rival group. My father was managing the whole arrangement from the beginning. And my wife, his voice changed on the last 2 words. A fractional shift, almost imperceptible. But Imani heard it because she had been listening to his voice for 2 years, and she knew what the change meant. My wife was managing the fact that she had been made the center of a lie so that everyone else could keep managing their secrets. Young-suk's eyes moved to Imani. Imani looked back at her. She had nothing to say to Young-suk right now. She was conserving everything for after, for whenever after arrived. Give me the archive, Seojun said. I was not looking at Young-suk. He was looking at the boat, at Park Soyeon, still in the cabin doorway with the tablet and her thumb on its edge and the 40-second timer 1 motion away. Park Soyeon said, What happens to Young-suk? That's not a negotiation you're in a position to make, Seojun said. Answer me. She's family, he said, which means it's a family matter, which means it doesn't leave this organization. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you get. He looked at her directly. The archive, Park. Now. If I give you the archive, she said, I want your word that what's in it, specifically the content relating to your father, stays in your hands. That it doesn't go to the police, it doesn't go to rival parties, it doesn't get used to publicly destroy a dead man's name. The request was specific enough to mean she had read everything in it, had known for 3 years what it contained, had made a choice 3 years ago to hold it for Young-suk rather than bring it to Seojun, and was now trying to extract the maximum value from surrendering it, professional to the last. Seojun said, My father's name is his family's business. I have no interest in making it anyone else's. Park Soyeon looked at him for a long moment. Then she held out the tablet. Woo was beside the boat in 2 steps. He took the tablet. Park Soyeon let go of it without resistance, which meant the 40-second timer threat had been a performance, which Imani had suspected and was now confirmed, because a woman who had spent 3 years carefully maintaining an archive for leverage was not going to delete it on a dock in Mappo, when the alternative was surrendering it to the man who controlled the organization whose secrets it contained. She had never been going to destroy it. She had needed Seojun to believe she would, which meant Park Soyeon was smarter and colder and more deliberate than almost anyone else who had appeared in this story. And Imani filed that information away with the particular attention she gave to things that might still matter later. Woo brought the tablet to Seojun. He looked at the screen. His expression remained still while he read, and Imani watched him read and did not try to see what was on the screen because he would tell her what he needed her to know, and she would trust that, and trusting that was a different thing than it would have been 6 hours ago. Not easier, not resolved, but cleaner somehow, the way a wound is cleaner after it has finally been opened to air. He read for a long time. Then he handed the tablet to Imani. She looked at it. The screen showed the root directory of the archive, dozens of folders, years of documentation, the quiet accumulated record of a betrayal that had been carefully managed and carefully hidden and had cost, among other things, 18 months of her life. At the bottom of the screen, below the file tree, was a metadata field, account establishment date, account type, authorization signatures, primary, Kang Jong-suk, secondary, Kang Do-hyun. And below that, in a separate field she hadn't noticed at first, a third field labeled authorized witness, a name that was neither Jung-suk nor Do-hyun, Kang Ye-jin. Imani looked at the screen, then she looked up at Seo-jun. He was already looking at her. He had seen it. He had seen it before he handed her the tablet. He had given it to her anyway, which meant he wanted her to see it, needed her to see it, because there was no version of the next conversation that worked if she didn't have the full picture. Yejin had told them tonight that she discovered the accounts 8 months before the raid, that she had confronted Young-suk, that she had been threatened into silence, but an authorized witness signature meant she hadn't just discovered the account. She had signed it. She had been there when it was created. Everything she had said in the server room, the story about discovering it later, the threats from Young-suk, the impossible position she had been put in, had the specific structure of a truth that has been carefully edited to remove the parts that change what the truth means. Seo-jun said quietly to Woo, "Call the estate." "Sir." "Find Ye-jin. Tell her the transfer can stop." He paused. "Tell her I need to speak with her. Tell her—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Just find her. Don't tell her anything." Woo made the call. Imani stood on the dock with the tablet in her hands and the river moving black and quiet alongside them, and felt the specific, nauseating expansion of a night that had already been the longest of her life continuing to grow. She thought about Ye-jin in the server room, typing, cooperating, the woman who had apologized to her face in the garage and called it the truth, and meant, what? Partial truth? The shape of the truth with the most incriminating pieces removed? She thought about what it meant to spend a year and a half believing you had been betrayed by one person, and then discovering it had been two, and then a third, and then a dead man, and then the dead man's version of good intentions. And she thought about whether there was a bottom to this particular excavation, or whether you could just keep going down. Woo came back. He looked at Seo-jun with an expression that was not panic. Woo did not do panic, but which had the quality of a man delivering information he would rather not be delivering. "She's not in the server room," Woo said. "Where is she?" "We don't know." He paused. "The server room is empty. The transfer was stopped manually from the desk. The external drives are gone." Seo-jun said, "The drives." "The physical drives from the rack unit, all 6. She pulled them." "When?" "Estimated between when we left the estate and now. The security team on the East Wing was redeployed to the perimeter incursion. There was a window of approximately 35 minutes where the corridor was not actively monitored." 35 minutes. The drive from the estate to the Mapo apartment. While they had been moving south through Seoul toward the river, Ye-jin had been in the server room pulling hardware. Seo-jun's jaw worked once, just once. Imani said she was never cooperating. He didn't answer. "She was buying time," Imani said. "The transfer, the cooperation, the apology. She was keeping us in that room, keeping us looking at the digital records, while she worked out how much time she had to pull the physical media." She thought about Ye-jin's hands on the keyboard, the efficient, certain movements, the woman who knew this system better than anyone because she had built it. She knew which files were most damaging. She knew what she needed to take. She's been planning a secondary exit since before tonight. "She knew about the dinner," Seo-jun said. It was not a question. He was working it through the same way she was. She knew what Hwayeon was planning. She may have encouraged it. If the dinner forced things into the open, she controlled what came out. "Until you came home early." "Until I came home early." The dock was quiet around them. Young-suk stood 3 feet away, not trying to move, not trying to speak, with the expression of a woman who has just watched a situation she had some control over slip entirely beyond anyone's management. Park Soyeon was still in the boat cabin, sitting now, her professional composure intact, but her eyes doing the work of someone rapidly recalculating a position. Seojun looked at his men, then at Young-suk, then at the river. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, but from the way his face changed, something going tight and then deliberately, carefully blank. Imani understood it was not an unknown caller. He answered it. He listened. He did not speak for 30 seconds. When he spoke, he said 2 words. How much? Listened again. 15 seconds. No. He ended the call. Everyone on the dock was looking at him. He looked at Imani. Yejin has made contact with the rival organization, he said. She's offering the drives. The weight of that sentence landed differently on everyone present. On Wu it landed as a tactical problem. On Young-suk it landed as something more complicated. A kind of sick recognition. The look of someone watching a move they have seen before play out again in a different hand. On Park Soyeon it landed as confirmation of something she had suspected. On Imani it landed as the final, complete shape of the thing she had been living inside for 18 months without being able to see its edges. Yejin had not been protecting the family. She had not been managing a dangerous situation. She had been building an exit. The whole time, the server room, the documentation, the careful maintenance of leverage over Young-suk, the manufactured evidence against Imani, the threat to Min-jae. All of it had been the construction of a position, a negotiating position, a portfolio of value she could eventually take to a buyer. She had been building an asset, and now she was selling it. The call, Imani said. They contacted you. They want to negotiate the terms of the transfer, Seojun said. They're offering to exchange Yejin and the drives for... He stopped. For an end to any counteraction against their organization, full cessation, in writing. They want you to let them walk. They want me to let all of them walk, Yejin, the people who breached the perimeter tonight, their existing operations. He paused. And Young-suk. Young-suk made a sound that was not quite a word. They've been planning this, Seojun said. Not Yejin alone. Yejin and them together. The incursion tonight was not a retrieval operation for the evidence. It was a distraction. He said it with the flat quality of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it and is not going to pretend otherwise. While we were dealing with the perimeter breach, while we were focused on the garage and the server room and the dining room, they were building the conditions for this call. When do they want an answer? Wu said. Seojun said, 1 hour. 1 hour. Imani looked at the river. The Han moved past the dock with the complete indifference of water to the specific human disasters occurring alongside it. And she thought about an hour, about what could be done in an hour, about what couldn't be undone in an hour if the wrong decision got made in the next 59 minutes. She thought about Yejin's hands on that keyboard. She said, where would she go, right now? Between pulling those drives and making contact with the rival group, she needs a location. Somewhere to be while the negotiation happens. Somewhere that has enough security to give her leverage if the handoff goes wrong. She looked at Seojun. She wouldn't trust their facility. She wouldn't put herself in their hands before the deal is confirmed. Seojun said, no. Then she needs a neutral location, something she controls or can reasonably secure on short notice. She paused. What does Yejin own independently? Not through the organization, personally. Seojun and Wu exchanged a look. The Mapo office, Wu said, the building on Tojong-ro. She took it as personal property during the restructuring 3 years ago. It was a legitimate transfer, below market. We flagged it at the time, but how far? Seojun said. 12 minutes from here. Seojun looked at Imani for a moment. One of those moments that were a conversation without words. Her having found the thread, him deciding whether to pull it. Both of them understanding that pulling it meant committing to the next thing before knowing how the next thing ends. He pulled it. 2 cars, he said to Wu. Armed. We go in quiet. I don't want her knowing we're moving until we're on the door. He looked at Young-suk. You're coming. He looked at Park Soyeon. You're staying on the boat. My man stays with you. He looked at the man closest to the boat. She moves. You call me. He turned toward the cars. Imani fell into step beside him. He didn't tell her to stay. She hadn't expected him to. The drive to Tojong-ro took 11 minutes. The city moved past in the way cities move at night when you are inside something urgent. The lights brighter than usual. The distances between things compressed. Every red light a small violence against the specific pressure of time running in one direction while you need it to run in another.
Seojun sat in the front. Imani sat in the back with Young-suk between her and the door. Nobody spoke for the first 8 minutes. Then Young-suk said, to the window, to no one in particular, "She's going to sell everything, everything your father built, everything I tried to protect. She's going to hand it to them and disappear, and they will use what she gives them to dismantle this organization from the outside while your family is still trying to process what happened tonight." "I know," Seojun said. "If you go in the front of that building, she'll know before you reach the elevator." "I know." "There's a service entrance on the east side." "I know the building. I reviewed the acquisition when she proposed it. The freight elevator runs to the 4th floor. Her personal office is 404, corner unit, northeast." She paused. "The 4th floor fire door can be opened from the stairwell with a maintenance code. The code hasn't been changed since the building management company did the annual update in March. I know because I made sure I knew." Seojun turned around and looked at his aunt. Young-suk met his eyes. "Why?" he said. "Because I am 61 years old," she said, "and I have been managing impossible situations in this family since before you understood what this family was, and I know what it looks like when something is still manageable and what it looks like when it is not." She held his gaze. "And I'm telling you that this is still manageable, but only if you get to that office before she completes the transfer." "Why are you helping me?" he said. Not rhetorically, the direct question. "Because Yejin made her deal with me the same way she made her deal with everyone else in this family," Young-suk said. "She used what was true to build something that wasn't. What I did, what your father and I built, I will answer for that. With you. In private. As family." Her voice was steady and old and very tired. "But I'm not going to let that woman walk out of Seoul with the architecture of everything your father spent his life building and hand it to people who will use it to put his grandchildren in danger." The car was quiet. Then Seojun said, "The maintenance code." Jung-suk told him. He relayed it to Woo. The building on Tojung Row was a 6-story commercial structure, older, the kind of building that handles its age by being clean rather than renovated. The street in front of it was quiet at this hour. A few parked cars, a convenience store 2 doors down still lit. The building itself dark on most floors except for a single lit window on the 4th floor, northeast corner. She was there. Seojun looked up at the window from the car. 1 hour, the rival syndicate had said. He checked his watch. 38 minutes remaining. He looked at Woo. He looked at Imani. She looked back at him, and in the orange-lit interior of the stopped car, with the building in front of them and the window lit above, and 38 minutes left before a negotiation completed that would undo everything they had come this far to prevent, she thought, this is the part where it either holds or it doesn't. "Let's go," she said. The service entrance on the east side of the building was exactly where Young-suk said it would be. A heavy steel door, industrial gray, with a keypad mounted at shoulder height and a thin strip of light coming from underneath it. Woo entered the maintenance code. The pad beeped once, green, and the lock disengaged with a sound like a single knuckle cracking. Seojun went in first. The freight elevator was slow and loud and smelled like machine oil and the particular trapped air of a space that moves people and things vertically without any interest in comfort. Seojun held the door open while Woo and 2 others came through, then Imani, then Young-suk with Park's hand on her elbow. The elevator fit all of them without room to spare. Nobody spoke during the ascent. Imani could hear her own breathing and Young-suk's and the mechanical complaint of the cable system above them, and she focused on the number panel and watched the 3 change to 4. The door opened onto a service corridor. Fluorescent lighting, the same exposed pipes she had seen in the estate's servant passages, the kind of institutional sameness that connects all the functional spaces behind the presentable ones. Woo pointed left. They moved left. The fire door at the end of the corridor had a small wire glass window at eye height. Seojun paused before it and looked through. Imani came up beside him and looked. The 4th floor hallway was carpeted, better lit than the corridor they were standing in. A row of closed office doors on either side. At the far end, the northeast corner, the door marked 404 had light coming from the gap underneath it, a thin bar of yellow in the dim hallway. Seojun looked at Woo, one finger up. Woo nodded, turned to the 2 men behind him, hand signals that Imani had learned to read over 2 years of proximity to people who communicated this way. You take the door, you hold the corridor,
You stay with the asset being Young-suk. Then Seojun looked at Imani. She expected him to tell her to stay in the service corridor. He said very low, "When we go in, stay behind me until I tell you otherwise." She nodded. He pushed the fire door open. They moved fast and quiet down the hallway. Seojun, then Imani, then Woo, then the other two men spread wide. The carpet absorbed their footsteps almost completely. 30 feet, 20. The light under the door was steady, no movement shadows, which meant either Yejin was sitting still or she had heard them and gone still, and both possibilities required the same next action. Seojun tried the handle, locked. He stepped back and Wu was already there with the tool, 40 seconds of quiet work on the lock mechanism, and then the door opened and Seojun went through it, and Imani went through right behind him. The office was large for a 4-story commercial building, a corner unit, 2 walls of windows looking out over the intersection below, both sets of blinds half drawn. A long desk along the inner wall, cleared of everything except a laptop, a small rack-mounted drive unit connected to it by a thick cable, and a phone line face up on the desk. Yejin was standing at the window. She was still wearing what she had worn to the anniversary dinner, the black dress, the jade pin. But the pin was gone now, lost somewhere between the estate and here, and her hair had come partly loose from where it had been fastened. She had a glass of water in her right hand, just water. And she was looking out at the intersection below with the expression of someone who has already finished thinking through the thing they were thinking through and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it. She did not look surprised. She turned around when she heard them enter, and looked at Seojun, and then at Imani behind him, and then at Jung-suk in the doorway being held by Park. And her face moved through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then something that settled into a kind of bleak composure. She set the water glass down on the windowsill. "You made good time," she said. "Step away from the desk," Seojun said. "The transfer hasn't completed," she said. "I want you to know that. I was going to. I had the connection open." She gestured at the laptop. "But I hadn't sent it yet." "Why?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because I was standing at that window and I was trying to decide whether I could actually do it." "And?" "And I don't know yet." She looked at Imani. "I owe you a longer explanation than I've given you." "You owe her more than an explanation," Seojun said. "Yes, I know." She looked back at him. "How did you find me?" He said, "Young-suk." Yejin looked at his aunt, and something crossed her face that was not quite betrayal and not quite resignation. The specific expression of someone who has understood that the alliance they built their position on was never as solid as they needed it to be. "She told you the code," Yejin said. "And the floor," Seojun said. "And the room." Yejin looked at Jung-suk for a long moment. Jung-suk looked back at her without apology, without performance, just the tired, direct gaze of a woman who has made a decision and is not going to dress it up. "I should have known," Yejin said. Not bitterly, just as an observation. She moved away from the window, not toward the desk, away from it, toward the center of the room, which Seojun tracked but did not move to stop. She lowered herself into the single chair in the center of the office. A plain chair, the kind of office chair that belongs to a room used occasionally and without sentiment. And she sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and looked at Seojun with the attentiveness of someone ready to have a difficult conversation they have been avoiding. "The drives," Seojun said. She pointed at the rack unit connected to the laptop. "All of them?" "All 6. She paused. "I pulled them because I needed leverage, not because I intended to destroy the data." She said it simply. "I knew if you had the digital transfer from my server, you'd have enough to build a case against Young-suk, enough to take to the family council, but not enough to understand the full structure, the 5-year account, the original authorization, your father." She looked at her hands. "I thought if I controlled the physical media, I controlled what you found out first." "You were going to manage what I learned," Seojun said. "In what order? The same way you've been managing everything." "Yes." "And the call to the rivals syndicate." She was quiet for a moment. "I made contact with them 3 hours ago, before the dinner escalated. For the past 2 weeks, I had been in contact with them." She looked up. "Because I was trying to find out whether the negotiation channel your father established was still intact, whether what he built could be rebuilt into something that would actually work." something that would end the conflict that has been building for 3 years without a war. Seojun said, or you were building your exit. Both, she said. I won't lie to you. Both were true. I was looking for a way out, and I still believed the underlying idea was right. That the two organizations will destroy each other if someone doesn't build the channel your father tried to build. She looked at him with a directness that had no manipulation left in it, just the directness of someone who is out of options and has decided honesty is the only remaining currency. Your father wasn't wrong, Seojun. He was just early. He's been dead for 3 years, Seojun said. The channel died with him. What's been happening since then is not a negotiated relationship. It's a slow war with ceasefires. And tonight, they sent men into my estate. Because the situation broke down, she said. Because what your father built needed maintenance and instead got abandoned and then weaponized by people on both sides who preferred conflict to negotiation. Including you. She closed her eyes, opened them. Including me. The room was quiet. Wu was at the desk, disconnecting the rack unit from the laptop with careful, systematic movements. The drives were safe. The transfer had not completed. Imani watched Wu work and felt the specific quality of a crisis that has passed its worst point and is now in the territory of accounting. Not safe, not resolved, but through the worst of it, into the place where what happens next is damage management rather than survival. Seojun said, the night of the raid, everything, from the beginning. Yejin looked at him. All of it? All of it. She took a breath. She told him. It took 45 minutes. Imani sat on the windowsill across the room and listened to all of it. The full account, not the edited version from the server room, not the managed disclosure of the garage, but the actual sequence of events as Yejin had lived them, starting 5 years ago when she was 23 and newly appointed to the financial directorship, and Kang Do-hyun had called her into his office and shown her the account and explained what it was for and asked her to witness the documentation as a condition of her role. She had been 23. Do-hyun had been the man who gave her the position. She had signed because you signed when Kang Do-hyun put a document in front of you and asked you to witness it, and you were 23 years old and you believed he understood things you didn't yet. She had spent 5 years understanding that she had been made complicit before she understood what complicity meant. When Do-hyun died, she had found herself holding knowledge that could dismantle the organization her family had built, and she had made a decision. Not the right decision. She said this without prompting. She said it looking directly at Seojun. But the decision she had been capable of making at the time. She had decided to manage it. To keep control of the information, to monitor Young-suk's continuation of the channel, to build documentation that could be used if the situation became untenable, and to wait for a moment when she could resolve it without the resolution being worse than the problem. The raid had been the moment when she understood the management had failed, and Imani had been standing in the wrong corridor at the wrong time. When Yejin finished, the room was very still. The intersection below the windows had gone quiet the way city intersections go quiet between 2 and 3 in the morning. Not silent, but reduced, the city breathing slower. Seojun stood in the center of the room. He hadn't sat. He had stood for the entire 45 minutes and listened without interrupting, which Imani recognized as one of his tells. He stood when he was absorbing something he needed to keep separate from his own reactions, using the position of his body as a container for the distance he needed. He said, Imani. She looked at him. I need you to tell me what you want. The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected from a man in his position. She had been around enough people in his position to know that asking the injured party what they want was not always standard practice, but because of when he asked it, in the room, while Yejin was sitting 10 feet away, while Jung-suk was in the doorway, while Wu was at the desk with 6 drives in a case and the laptop open and the evidence of 2 decades of careful, compounding betrayal sitting on a hard surface between them. He was asking her in front of all of it. She looked at Yejin, at the woman who had made her the instrument of a lie and then apologized for it in a garage and then tried to run with the evidence and then stood at a window in the middle of the night, deciding whether she could complete a betrayal she had already set in motion and found she could not. She looked at Jung-suk, at the woman who had built a financial channel with an enemy organization at her dead brother-in-law's direction and then continued it for 3 years after he died, and then used the threat of its exposure as a mechanism of control over her nephew's wife through his cousin, and had then, on a dock at midnight, given Seo-jun the code and the floor and the room number because she had decided that one particular betrayal was the one she would not commit. She looked at Seo-jun. "I want the truth to exist on the record," she said. "Everything Ye-jin did, everything Jung-suk did, the account, the raid, all of it, documented, in writing, in your hands. Not police, not outside. Yours." She paused. "I want your family to know what happened. Not a version of it. What happened. Your mother, Min-jae, all of them." "Done," he said. "And I want to leave," she said. He said, "Leave. Tonight. I want to go back to the estate, get my things, and go somewhere that isn't that house. I need—" She stopped, reconsidered how to say it. "I need to be somewhere that isn't inside this situation, for a while. Maybe a long while." She looked at him. "I'm not ending anything. I'm not handing back the ring. I'm saying I need distance from this house, and this family, and this—" She gestured at the room, at the drives, at all of it. "I need distance from all of this to know what I actually feel when it's not being compressed by everything that's been happening." Seo-jun looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." "Will you tell me when you know?" She thought about it. "Yes." "Then go," he said. "Take one of my cars. Take whoever you want with you, or go alone." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to ask you to stay. I'm not going to make the call that makes it easier for you to stay than to leave. I made that mistake in the other direction for 18 months, and I am not going to compound it by making a different version of the same mistake now." She looked at him. There was so much she could say. There was a quantity of things she had been not saying for 18 months that had accumulated into something enormous, and she could feel the weight of all of it pressing against the inside of this particular moment, and she made a deliberate decision to set it down. Not to abandon it. To set it down in a place she could come back to when the weight of the night wasn't still on everything. She said, "When this is settled, when you've dealt with—" She gestured at Ye-jin, at Jung-suk, at all of it. "When it's settled, we'll talk." "Yes," he said. She looked at Ye-jin one more time. Ye-jin was watching her from the chair in the center of the room with the attentiveness of someone who knows they don't have the standing to say anything but is listening to everything. Her hands were still in her lap. The jade pin was gone. She looked older than she had at the dinner table 4 hours ago, which was the honest truth of what this evening had cost her. Not the performance of age, but the actual thing, the way a person looks when they have set down a weight they have been carrying for a long time, and what they feel is not relief, but the sudden, full awareness of what carrying it did to them. Imani said to her, "You owe me 18 months. Ye-jin said, "I know. I don't know yet what that means, what I'm going to need it to look like." Imani paused. "But I know you owe me that." "Yes," Ye-jin said. "I do." Imani walked to the door. Park stepped aside to let her through. Jung-suk stepped aside. She went through the door into the 4th-floor hallway, and the carpet absorbed her footsteps, and the bar of yellow light from the office shrank and disappeared as the door swung shut behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked to the elevator. The drive back to the estate took 23 minutes. She sat alone in the back of the car with the window open 2 inches because she needed air, real air, the cold night air of the city, moving through the gap and across her face while soul resolved itself from the compressed emergency of the past 4 hours back into a city, just a city, enormous and indifferent and full of people who had slept through everything that happened tonight without knowing anything had happened. The estate was quieter than she expected. The incursion had been fully contained. She could see from the gate that the grounds had been secured, vehicles repositioned, lights on in the operational areas. The dining room was lit. She went in through the side entrance, past 2 of Seo-jun's men who recognized her and nodded and said nothing. And she went up the stairs to the room she shared with Seo-jun, and she stood in the doorway of it for a moment. The room looked the same as it had 4 hours ago, when she had dressed for the dinner in front of the bathroom mirror and wondered what the evening was going to cost her. It looked the same and was completely different in the way that rooms are different after something large has moved through the space that contains them. She got a bag from the closet, a single bag. She was not taking everything. She was taking enough for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the kind of packing that says I am leaving for now rather than I am leaving forever. She moved through the room with the deliberate attention of someone who knows the difference between those two things and is being careful to make the packing say the right one. She was almost done when the door opened. Hwayeon, the family matriarch, stood in the doorway of her son's room at 2:30 in the morning without her usual composed authority. She was still dressed from the dinner, still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she had said you brought disgrace into this family 4 hours ago. And she looked at Imani packing a bag with an expression that Imani had never seen on her face before. She did not look imperious. She did not look contemptuous. She did not look like a woman surveying an intruder in her son's room. She looked like someone who has just come from somewhere very hard and is still carrying the weight of the trip. She said, "May I come in?" Imani looked at her for a moment. Then she turned back to the bag and folded the sweater she was holding and placed it inside and said, "Yes." Hwayeon came in. She did not sit. She stood in the center of the room, the way Seo-jun had stood in the Tojong-ro office, using the upright position as a kind of containment. And she looked at the bag on the bed and she said, "You're leaving." "For now," Imani said. "I see." A pause. Min-jae told me what Yejin said to him, about the documentation she claimed to have. He told me... She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. He told me he had suspected for some time that you hadn't done it, that he had stayed silent because he was frightened of what Yejin could expose. He told me this tonight, after Seo-jun left, sitting in that dining room with half the food still on the table. Imani said nothing. She opened the side pocket of the bag and checked it and zipped it. "I owe you an apology," Hwayeon said. Imani stopped. She stood with her hand on the bag's zipper and waited. "I was given a story," Hwayeon said, "and I chose to believe it because it was easier to believe than the alternative." She said it plainly, without the softening language that apologies usually come wrapped in. The "I'm sorry you felt" and the "I never intended," and the careful architecture of accountability that isn't quite accountability. The alternative was that someone I had trusted my entire adult life had lied to me. And you were easier to doubt. I won't pretend otherwise. That is the specific thing I did, and I am telling you plainly that I did it. Imani turned around. She looked at Hwayeon, 63 years old, standing in her son's room in the middle of the night, saying the actual true thing without dressing it up. And she felt something complex and not fully nameable move through her. Not warmth exactly. Not forgiveness, which needed more time and more distance than she currently had. Something more like the recognition of one difficult woman by another. "I know," Imani said. Hwayeon held her gaze. "You deserved better from this family." "Yes," Imani said. "I did. And from my son." The addition of that last part, the willingness to include Seo-jun in the indictment to not protect him from the accounting, was the thing that made the apology different from the ones Imani had heard before. It was also the thing that made her understand that something in Hwayeon had shifted tonight in a way that was not performance. "He's learning," Imani said. "He is." Hwayeon looked at this bag. "Will you come back?" "I don't know yet." Hwayeon nodded once. She understood the answer, not as rejection, as honest uncertainty, which was something she could respect even if she could not yet fully absorb it. She turned to go. At the door she stopped. "When my husband was building this organization," she said, not turning around, addressing the door, "I told myself that what we were building was security, for the family, for the children." She paused. "Tonight I found out that the security came with a price I was never told about, and that the price was paid by people who had no say in what was purchased." She turned slightly, not all the way. "I'm going to have to think very carefully about what that means." Then she left. Imani stood in the room for a long moment after she was gone. Then she zipped the bag, picked it up, and carried it out. Min-jae was in the hallway. I was not standing there with purpose. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his head back, the posture of someone who has been there for a while and is not entirely sure why. He straightened when he saw her. He was 26 years old, and he looked exhausted in the honest way, the way that has nothing left in it for performance. He said, "I should have said something." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He looked at her without flinching, which she gave him credit for. "I know sorry doesn't..." "No," she said. It doesn't. She stopped in front of him. She was not going to tell him it was fine, or that she understood, or any of the other softening things that would have made the next 10 seconds easier for both of them. But you said it tonight, in that dining room. You stood up and you said it in front of your mother and Yejin and everybody else. She paused. That was the right thing. It was 2 years late, but it was the right thing. He looked at the floor, then at her. Are you coming back? I don't know. I hope you do, he said. And then like someone testing the weight of words he hasn't said before in the order he's saying them. I hope you come back because you want to, not because of Seo-jun, because this could be your family too, if you wanted it to be. She looked at him for a moment. Ask me again in a year, she said. He nodded. She walked past him and down the stairs and out through the main entrance and into the cold night air of the estate grounds, and the gate opened for her, and she walked through it into the beginning of whatever came after. She found an apartment in Yongsan, small, south-facing, with a window that looked out over a tangle of rooftops toward the Han River. She had found it herself, with her own money, without anyone's connections or anyone's name opening any doors. She signed the lease on a Wednesday morning with her hands steady and her name in Korean and English, because she was both of those things and had never apologized for it. She started taking architecture projects again. Small ones at first. A residential renovation in Mapo. A commercial interior in Gangnam-gu. The kind of work that required her whole attention and returned the specific satisfaction of making something real out of a problem that had once seemed impossible. She worked long hours and slept well and cooked badly and called her grandmother in Atlanta on Sunday evenings and told her more of the truth than she had been telling for 2 years. Seo-jun did not call her. He texted 3 times in the first month. The first time to tell her that Yejin had been removed from every position and every organization connected to the Kong family. The second time to tell her that the rival syndicate's leadership had been exposed through the documentation on the recovered drives, and that the police, working from a carefully managed anonymous disclosure, had made arrests that effectively ended the conflict that Do-hyun Kang had spent 5 years trying to prevent through negotiation. The third time to tell her that Young-suk had agreed to a full accounting before the family council, with all of it documented, and that the outcome of that accounting was still being determined. He said nothing about himself in any of the 3 messages. She appreciated that. She texted back after each one. Brief acknowledgments, the kind that said she had read it and processed it and was not ready for more than that yet. On a Sunday evening in the 3rd month, she was sitting by the south-facing window looking at the rooftops when her phone rang, and it was Seo-jun, and she looked at it for 2 rings before she answered. I have something I need to say to you, he said, and I want to say it once, clearly, and I'm not going to ask you to respond to it or do anything with it. I just need you to have heard it. She said, okay. He said, I let them treat you the way they treated you because I thought that protecting you privately was the same as defending you. I knew it wasn't the same, and I told myself it was anyway, because defending you publicly would have cost me something, and protecting you privately cost me nothing. He paused. That is the thing I am most ashamed of. Not that I failed to investigate the accusation, not that I was deceived along with everyone else, but that I knew you were being treated unjustly, and I calculated the cost of stopping it and decided it was too high. He paused again, longer. I don't have anything to offer you in exchange for that. I don't think it works that way. I just needed you to hear me say it plainly. She sat with the phone against her ear and the rooftop view in front of her and the Sunday evening quiet of Yongsan around her. She said, I heard you. That's all I needed, he said. Seo-jun. Yes. She thought about what she wanted to say. She had spent 3 months thinking, with more space and more honesty than she had allowed herself in 2 years, about what she wanted and what she was willing to carry and what she was not. She had thought about the dinner and the server room and the dock and the office at 2 in the morning and the look on his face when he handed her the tablet with the full record of all of it. She had thought about a man who had loved her in the dark and said nothing in the light, and who had in the end stepped aside when she walked toward the door because he understood that commanding her to stay would be the last and worst version of the same mistake. She said, I'm not there yet, but I'm not gone. A pause. Okay, he said. Give me more time. You have it, he said, as much as you need. They said goodbye, and she ended the call and set the phone on the windowsill and looked at the rooftops for a long time. 6 months after the anniversary dinner, the Kong family gathered for a different kind of meal. Not a celebration, not a performance, but a Sunday lunch in the estate's smaller dining room, the one used for family rather than occasions. Huayan had suggested it. She had suggested it in a letter, an actual handwritten letter on paper, delivered to Imani's Yongsan apartment by a car she had not asked Seojun to send. Imani had read the letter 3 times. Then she had written back. She came alone, by subway and then on foot, wearing her own clothes, carrying nothing she needed to defend. Seojun was waiting at the main entrance, not in a gesture. He was there because he had been looking out the window and seen her come through the gate and had come to meet her, which was different from staging a welcome, and she was glad for the difference. He looked the same and different in the way that 3 months looks on a person who has been living through something difficult, honestly. Thinner, maybe. More still than he used to be, the kind of stillness that is not absence but presence. Someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining a surface and has that energy back now. He said, "You came." I said I would. You did. They stood at the entrance for a moment, the estate behind him and the city somewhere behind her and the cold afternoon around both of them, and she looked at him and he looked at her, and there was a great deal in the air between them that had not yet been said and would take longer to say than an afternoon could hold. He said, "Come in." She went in. The dining room was full, Huayan at the head of the table, Minji beside her, the aunts and cousins who had been at the anniversary dinner 5 months ago and who had known, since Seojun had stood in front of the family council 2 weeks later and laid out everything Yejin had built and everything Young-suk had maintained and everything that had been allowed to continue in the name of management and protection, exactly what had been done and who had done it and what it had cost. They had known for months. Some of them had been there when Seojun stood in front of the council and said, "This family betrayed my wife." Not the organization, not the strategy, not the rival syndicate. This family. These people. With our silence and our willingness to believe the easy thing about someone we had already decided to distrust. Some of them had agreed with him. Some of them had not. Not entirely. Not yet. But they were all here. When Imani came through the dining room door, the room's sound did not stop exactly. It adjusted, the way sound adjusts when a new element enters a space and the acoustics have to account for it. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the table and the people around it. An older relative, one of Do-hyun's cousins, a man in his 70s who had been at every Kong family gathering for 50 years, and who had, at the anniversary dinner, been one of the people who did not meet her eyes, looked up, looked at her, did not look away. It was a small thing. She held it. Huayan pulled out the chair beside her own. Imani walked to the table and sat. Seojun took the place on her other side. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no formal restoration of anything. Just the meal beginning the way meals begin. Food passed, plates filled, conversation starting and branching and overlapping the way it does when the people around a table are trying, genuinely trying, to be in the same room together. She ate. At some point during the meal, Seojun reached under the table and put his hand next to hers, not taking it, just placing it there. An offering rather than a claim. She looked at her plate for a moment. Then she turned her hand over and took his. She was not all the way back. She knew that and he knew that, and the table didn't need to know anything about the arithmetic of it. How much time and how much honesty and how much patient, imperfect work it would take before the distance between where she was and where she had been on the night she arrived in this family was something she could look at without the specific weight of all it had cost. But she was here. She had chosen to be here. Not rescued, not coerced, not managed into it. She had gotten on the subway by herself and walked through the gate and sat down at the table because she had thought carefully about what she wanted and had decided with full knowledge of everything it meant that she was not finished with this. That was not a small thing. Seojun understood it was not a small thing. He didn't squeeze her hand or make a performance of the moment. He just held on, steady and present, the way a person holds on when they understand exactly what they are holding and how easily it could have gone differently, and intend to spend a very long time being grateful that it didn't. The meal went on around them, imperfect and ordinary and alive. And outside the estate windows, Seoul moved through its afternoon with the vast indifference of a city that contains somewhere inside it every kind of story. The ones that end cleanly, the ones that don't end at all, And the ones that end like this, without resolution that erases anything, without a restoration that costs nothing, but with two people sitting at a difficult table together because they have chosen to, which is the only kind of choice that means anything. The lie that had burned through this family was gone. What it left behind was not clean. It was not simple. The shape of the damage was still visible in certain looks and certain silences, and the way some conversations still had to be navigated carefully because the ground under them had not fully settled. But damage and destruction are not the same thing. And this family, imperfect and fractured and still in the early hard work of understanding what it had done and what it owed, was still here.